Dave is a phenomenal businessman who has huge impact on what we consider commerce. He started a business years ago. He's impacted more than 65 million people through something they call Kingdom Investors. Now, Kingdom Investors is not an investment platform for businesses that belong to the kingdom. It's just a name that they've started years ago, but he's created a bit of a structure, or we would say an algorithm that has worked, that's actually come from the Bible. So I am so excited to everybody watching this today, because a lot of these values are some of the values we hold as a publication. And sometimes, and I think now then more than ever, it's just amazing to have a bit of a good, like a hope narrative. So Dave, thank you very much. And thank you for being part of the show this morning. It's an honor and pleasure having you. I know that you get requests all around the world, and little Cape Town, South Africa is privileged this morning to have you part of our show. So thank you for being part of the show this morning, Dave. And,
look, it's a great pleasure, and it's an honor to talk to you guys. I'm nothing special. I'm just an ordinary guy. So what a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Dave, for our viewers who don't know, can obviously hear there's an Australian accent. But you spend a lot of your time in Africa. What is that like, Dave?
Well, I actually grew up in Africa. So I was born in London, but I got to Africa when I was 1. And I lived in Zambia for the first 4 years of my life. And, you know, there were plenty of white kids there, but I gravitated to the black kids for some reason. And I played with them and grew up with them. And my first language wasn't English. It was actually Bemba. And so, you know, that was a paradise for me living. I learned everything about the bush. I learned how to track and how to trap and how to make string and fire and everything else in the bush. And I just grew up literally as a white black kid. But when I was 4 years old, the independence movements were sweeping south. And of course, it was a little bit violent. This was in the late 1950s. So my parents sent me to school in South Africa, to boarding school in South Africa, right down in King Williamstown, near where you guys are. I think it's in the Cape. Yeah, so I went to Dale College, but I was still only 4 years old, and they stuck me on a train in Ndola in Zambia and sent me down to school unescorted across 4 countries. Took 10 days on the train, old steam train. And when I got to South Africa, of course, I only spoke Bemba. I spoke English, but not very well. And in King Williamstown was a farming community. They spoke Afrikaans mostly. And of course, I went to go and play with the black kids, and they ran away because of apartheid. And the white kids beat my brains out because I was trying to talk to the black kids, and it was a mess, you know. So I sort of grew up with a lot of adversity and a lot of rejection, but it was good training for what was to come. And I learned to fight. I learned to protect myself. I learned to counter the bullying, and eventually I learned to beat them up in return. So it was a time of adversity, but it was great training for what I'm doing these days. Yeah. Anyway, eventually I had to join when my parents moved to what was then Rhodesia. And of course, I went to school then in Rhodesia, but also to boarding school. My parents lived on a farm. And I learned Shona, which was the main language in the region that I was in. And that became my first language. I was by then fluent in English, obviously. But again, I gravitated towards the indigenous folks and learned the Rhodesian bush. And but when Rhodesia declared independence, or UDI, from England, obviously everybody declared war on us, and we had to go and fight that war. So we fought against Mugabe and Joshua Nkomo's 2 armies, and we fought against Frelimo in Mozambique and so on. They were independence movements in their mind, and we were defending our country in our mind. But it was nothing to do with race, because, you know, there was no racism in my mind. We all lived together, married, and went to the same schools. But either way, I fought that war for the next 10 years. And I fought in the Special Forces and the SAS and in the Selous Scouts, and then as a mercenary. And eventually, when the war ended in 1980 and Mugabe took over, I had a business. I had 2 mines and a big fishing company on Lake Kariba. But I sold those businesses, and in 1982, I came to Australia to see if I could find a market for the sapphires I was mining. And while I was here, I was accused of blowing up a squadron of British Hawk jets over at Thornhill Air Base in Gweru. Yeah, and somebody blew them up, but I was one of the only specialized demolitions guys left in the country. All the rest had left when Mugabe took over. So they accused me, and they were interrogating my mother, and they wanted, you know, when's he coming back from Australia? We want to talk to him. And they wanted, there's no justice system there. So for me, I couldn't go back, and my mother phoned me, so I stayed in Australia, or tried to. They wouldn't let me in. They said, "You get out, you're not a refugee." So I jumped on a plane back to Singapore, and well, the plane back to Harare, but it stopped in Singapore. And in Singapore, I managed to jump off and get a 2-week tourist visa. And then I got a job as a commercial saturation diver in the oil fields. So out of desperation, I was a sat diver, 400 feet deep, 35 days at a time, up in the Sea of Japan. I got paid good money, and eventually I managed to get my wife and kids out, and we managed to move into Australia many years later. So 1985, we came here to paradise. Here we are today.
Okay,
that was awesome. My experience in Africa.
That's absolutely. I just want to tag onto that. So, so you started a business in Australia. Now, I've watched one of your videos. I had the privilege to watch one of your webinars, and I was totally touched by your story, because I think right now we have so many different ways of how people do business. So you've touched on, you started a business, and you want to take us from there, what that business looked like and how it grew. And I know that you were stuck at some point, and then God spoke to you, and then things changed. He said you would write checks of huge amounts, and that kind of changed the direction for your business. You want to just give some insight to that?
Yes. Okay. So I got here in 1985, and I was just an ordinary sort of secular guy. And I had those businesses in Zimbabwe, the 2 mines, and I had the big fishing company. And of course, the business in Singapore when I became a commercial diver. And then when I got to Perth in Western Australia, I bought a business there. It was a motorcycle business. And every one of those businesses, I always managed to grow them to about $2 million. I never got above that. But anyway, I then became a Christian in mid-1980s, 87-ish. And when I did that, I actually had formed business ideas, Ron. So I was very concerned. Okay, if you keep in mind now, even though Rhodesia wasn't the perfect society, it was still the breadbasket of Africa, and it was an economy that flourished and prospered. And you had poor and rich, and you had white and black, but we got on and we built that nation. But after Mugabe took over, he plundered the place to such an extent that there was a macroeconomic implosion. Okay, and he plundered it, and it doesn't matter if he's black or white, just the fact is he was so corrupt. And his extended family, or his cartel, became so wealthy, while Zimbabwe became an economic basket case, and it collapsed and the people starved. So I looked at that and thought, wow, look at that, based on how corrupt can people be. And then when I got to Australia, I found the same corruption in this country, the 12th economy in the world by GDP. And I saw that the culture of corruption and greed and self-centeredness was firmly embedded in the marketplace here. And it was more sophisticated and not as blatant as you see in Africa, but it was still here. And I just thought, well, I better figure this out. I better look back, okay? And it was a trigger for me to go back through history. And I realized there was this culture of greed and self-centeredness, which was driving the motors and activities of mankind since the beginning of time. And this was actually the root cause of almost all social and economic distress that I could think of. And I also realized it was particularly prominent in the business world, in corporate activity, and it was completely unsustainable. So this is what was forming all of my opinions when I was living in Perth, and it was before I became a Christian. So I figured that therefore it didn't actually matter who was in charge, black people, white people, yellow people. Greed and self-centeredness were the fundamental drivers of the marketplace. And if we left it unchecked, it would always lead to the strong to maximize their own self-interest, and usually at great detriment of others. So it was evident in the raw state of business, when it comes to control of power and wealth. And by wealth, I'm talking about the accumulation of control of assets or money or estate. And then by power, I'm talking about everything from childhood bullying at school, to dominating in sport, to lording over a partner in a marriage, or corporate climbing, whatever it might be, right up to where whole economies are plundered like Mugabe did. So it was always about self-interest against the expense of everybody else. And when I looked at the modern marketplace, and I look at it today and the current economic downturn, it's exactly the same thing. We find companies driven by greed and self-centeredness, focused only on profit for their owners, typically the shareholders. And if we focus only on shareholders' profit, we will always do it at the expense of our employees, our supply chain, our customers, our community, and our environment. So given that a company relies on all of those, it must therefore be unsustainable to exploit them. Okay, so at some point it always implodes and it always blows up, and we have recessions, depressions, economic crisis like the one today, revolutions, wars, all coming from that same greed. So over the centuries, economic theory changed. Universities taught new modeling. Corporate laws and public policy changed to match the new modeling. But the cycle of socio-economic distress and human misery leading to regular economic collapse remained because the root cause was never fixed, okay? So it didn't matter if nations evolved from tribal feudalism to theocracies to monarchical rule, democracy, you know, then on to capitalism or Marxism or communism or socialism. The problems remained because the root cause remained. And it didn't matter if Adam Smith proposed the idea of the invisible hand in the 1760s. It didn't matter if John Maynard Keynes proposed the theory of expansionary physical policy or fiscal policy, and in the 1930s, and it didn't matter if Friedman proposed his idea of monetarism in the 1970s. Economic collapses kept happening. And this was all forming, in my mind, what was the root cause of the problem. And if the culture's flawed, it doesn't matter what we do, doesn't matter how we operate, it's always going to collapse. So in the mid-90s, when I became a Christian, it was when I was looking for economic solutions, okay? And I was looking for ways to build above my $2 million ceiling that I always seem to have. And it was in that space when I became a Christian that I looked at the biblical modeling of economics. And I found that instead of a profit-driven capitalism, there was a holistic form of capitalism that prevailed. And that was what I employed. And as I employed that, I began to change the marketplace. I began to change my own environment, my own company, and all of the stakeholders in the company. And we began to prosper. Later on in life, I moved over to Queensland, which is on the east coast of Australia. And it was while I was in Queensland, remember, I'm a Christian now, my mindset, you know, without any Christianese at all, okay, just my mindset as a Christian business person is that I should be funding the kingdom of God, you know, funding my local church and all this sort of stuff. And I was doing that, and I was on the board of the church, and I could see that the funds coming in, you know, I knew how much was coming in, and I was actually the biggest funder of my church. So I thought, yeah, as a Christian, I'm doing my stuff. But you know what happened? In 1998, okay, I got what we call a prophetic word. So in other words, a vision somebody had, and they told me, they said this here, you know what, Dave, this couple came out from Africa and they stood with Pastor Dan and Ann, they built a mighty church. Now that church was 2,000 kilometers away, and Pastor Dan and Ann had been in our church for 10 years and got transferred to go and fix his church, was in financial distress. So now here I am running my $2 million business in that area. And this guy comes to me and says, oh, I had this vision, you're going to move down there. And I'm thinking, okay, as a fairly new Christian for 10 years or so, maybe that's some like prophetic word, I better go and listen to it. But I thought if I leave this church, it's going to collapse financially. So I better stay. And so I stayed. And you know what? Over the next 2 years, my business took a dive. And in hindsight, I know, this might sound strange to secular people, but I know this from experience. We're now a $1.2 billion company, okay? So I know this to be fact. But in these circumstances, the Lord effectively stood me down, closed down my business because he wanted to get my attention. And it was only 2 years later when we were totally broke, we had no money left, I had $76,000 worth of credit card debt and no assets, that I decided I better go and do what I was told. So I did that. Okay, I drove 2,000 kilometers down here to where I am now on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia. And you know what, from a multimillionaire, we were so poor, we had one vehicle and it was boiling, get hot and boil every 300 kilometers. So it took us 3 days to drive that 2,000 Ks. And we had one loaf of bread between 5 of us. So from a multimillionaire to starving in 2 years. And when I got here, I went to the church that the prophetic word said, and I engaged in that church. And when I was there only 3 weekends, and a visiting pastor came through, and he was the senior national director of the Christian denomination that I was in. And he called me out of the audience and he said, you, sir, the Lord has shown me that there are finances written over your life. You will write six-figure checks for this church in the near future. $100,000 checks. I had no money. I had a job as a builder's laborer. I was earning $5 an hour. I had 76 grand's worth of credit card debt. Well, as it happened, because I applied those principles that I listed earlier, the economic principles that I learned, and because I now was doing my assignment, the one that I've been told to do by the Lord, he applied his favor. And you know, our business went from minus, so that's zero. We were minus 76 grand to $100 million company in 2 years and 7 months. Okay, and from there on, now don't forget, my ceiling was 2 million. I'd never gone above 2 million in 22 years in business. Now all of a sudden we had a $100 million company, and here we are today, $1.2 billion corporation here in Australia, and that was what happened.
Wow. Wow, I promise you, even if the whole interview was just about that, I think that was absolutely amazing. So the next question, because I think you've answered the previous one, is what impact did your business have on the greater society?
Okay, so the business had a lot of impact on society, mostly because we learned how to do business with the community in mind. So instead of just greed and self-centeredness driving the company, we have a community vision, okay? So the vision of our company, as we started to build it, I realized that we needed to actually influence this greed. I did not want Australia to turn into a Zimbabwe. I just didn't want that corruption for my kids. And by then I had grandkids. Now I have great-grandkids, okay? My grandchildren are great, they have children. So I wanted my children to live in shalom, in an awesome, peaceful, prosperous nation. I didn't want it taking a dive. So I set about making sure that my business operated in a community level. I wanted to prosper other people in the community, and I wanted to teach them what I knew to be the correct economic modeling. So people, profit, planet of equal, so not just profit, okay, not just profit-driven capitalism, because that plunders everybody into poverty. So people, profit, planet in equal proportions with an overarching culture of caring and sharing. And it's that culture that I was saying, it's the opposite of greed and self-centeredness, is caring and sharing. I'm not talking socialism, I'm talking about capitalism in a holistic fashion. We call it capitalholism, okay? It's one word, capitalholism. And it's the only economic modeling that actually works. It's the only one that will create human flourishing on a sustainable long-term model. So I set about making poor people as a demonstration. I took a group of 30 poor people and I turned them into multimillionaires. 21 of them came out as multimillionaires. And if you want, I can tell you that story. Please.
I think I heard it, but I think it's definitely worth telling the viewers about it. Yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you the story. When this was one of the legs up that we had to go from zero to $1 billion, but early on, it was about 2002, so 18 years ago. I was in the finance world, so I was a finance broker, and I wanted to learn all the banks. So I did. I learned all the banking, the credit policies, and eventually I became an international financier. But at that time, I was contracting to a finance broker called Aussie Home Loans. And Aussie was the biggest brokerage in the country. And they were competing with the banks to get people to come to them for mortgages, for their home loans or bonds or whatever you call them in South Africa. So I was contracting to them, and we were in an office. There was 12 of us in the office. And the Aussie had this ridiculous ad on television which said, come to Aussie Home Loans, we'll save you, meaning we'll save you from banks, right? So everybody that needed saving financially came to Aussie. And of course, you get the very poor people coming to Aussie wanting their dream homes here on the Sunshine Coast. And there were all these leads. People phone in, they get a lead sheet, and these leads were piling up in the room with all of these other brokers. And I said to the brokers, hey, whose are all these leads here? And they said, well, they're all for anybody who wants them. They are very poor people, and we're not going to go and see them. And I said, why not? And they said, because if we go there, the chances of getting a loan for them are very low because their incomes are so low. And even if we did get a loan, it's below the threshold that we'll get a commission. So we're not going to do it. So I said, so in other words, if you don't get paid, you're not going to help these people. And they said, no. And I said, even though our ad says we'll save you. And they said, no. So that was a classic example of profit-driven capitalism, okay? They had the skills to help those people, but they wouldn't do it unless they got paid. Now, my mindset was, well, if I go and prosper those poor people, they will prosper me in return. That's the biblical economic model in the book of Ruth, okay? If you go to look at Boaz, in the book of Ruth, and this was during a time of a 15-year international famine during which civilizations collapsed in 1300 BC. He actually made sure that everybody prospered and off his enterprise, and they all rose with the tide, and the Bethlehem region was very, very prosperous in history, okay? In fact, during the time when other civilizations were collapsing from drought. Anyway, point being, I said to them, okay, give me those leads. So I went out to those people, those poor people. I went to 2 of them every night, 2 families. And I taught them how to buy houses that were positively geared. So in other words, they could buy these really cheap houses out here in the regional area. They couldn't have their dream home yet, had to get little ones first. And those little houses, you could buy them for about $40,000. And the rent was more than the interest on the loan. So I got them these little small loans with the bank. I never got paid for all that work. It didn't matter. I wanted to get rid of poverty in the community here. So I did that. And then some of these people had start off with 1 house and 2 houses and 5 and 10 and 25 and 30 houses, because each one had a residual income, so they could get another loan. And I got them all the loans. I even took them out because they were scared, take them out to buy that house, that one. No, not that one, take this one. And then sometimes I'd take them all. We go to a small town, we buy everything in the town that was for sale. And then I just get them more and more loans. And eventually in about 2003 and 4, the residential market here on the Sunshine Coast went crazy. And all those little houses they paid 40 grand for, you couldn't replace them for 200 grand. So they quadrupled and 5-fold increase. And these people became very, very wealthy. Okay. And it was in 2 short years, they became multimillionaires. But I didn't just do it. I taught them why along the way. And I said, you guys have got to do the same. When everyone's in business, if we all care about each other, keep in mind, greed and self-centeredness on the one side, caring and sharing on the other side. I cared about them and I shared my expertise with them. And so they rose with the tide. Here we are today, a $1.2 billion corporation. We carry $96 million in investor capital. Over 80 million comes from 21 of those very poor people.
Wow.
Very poor people are very wealthy. And that shows you, it always comes back because it's an economic model. Okay, it's not because God said so. God says so because it works. Okay, so that's what happened in there. And there's 100 stories like that. That's how we built the big corporation.
So there's another story that stood out amongst many that you shared. But the one is when I'm not sure if you're still in the fitness business with your wife. You still have that business. Oh yes, I think I heard the last time you just moved into a new venue. But you had the ability to buy out one of the other people, and there was a bit of a struggle, and the lady didn't want to come. But you had a great opportunity, which we would consider in business, a great opportunity to buy something that is at a devalued rate, as someone is kind of falling down the slopes. And you had an opportunity to really do a deal that would be profitable, but yet you change that strategy. So for those who's watching and saying, what does a common example look like that we can apply, and what would be the outcomes? And I feel like that story kind of ties into answering a few questions. So you mind just sharing on that?
Yeah, not at all. You got a good memory there, Ronald. I'm worried. You're not working for Interpol or something.
Not yet.
So what happened there was, this was in the 2008 financial crisis, okay? It's very, very important, ladies and gents, if we could get the wealth out of the hands of wicked people and into the hands of what we call righteous people, or people that are community minded and will care and share, we can deal with massive amounts of social distress and human misery, okay? So we're always conscious of doing that. That is the biblical economic model that I'm talking about, the one that works. So here's an example that Ronald's talking about. In the 2008 financial crisis, it's always a good time to pick up. We're an acquisitions group. We buy businesses. That's what we do, okay? We're a group of 32 companies and trusts. And so we're always looking to buy businesses. And if one of them comes along our way that's a distressed business, then we're interested, okay? So in 2008, we've got this really big health club. It's down in our capital city, Canberra. So we own it as a family. We own the whole business privately as a family. And my wife is the managing director of that health club. We manage it from here, so remotely. It's about 2,000 kilometers away. But it's a big 5-star health club, and it's a women's health club, and it's the most fantastic. You walk in there, there's chandeliers in the toilets, and it's ridiculous. I don't think any bodybuilding gets done. It's just crazy. But anyway, point being that in 2008, when everybody was suffering economically, there was this one lady with an opposition health club. It was a sort of a 1-2-star type health club, different franchise. We heard that she was really struggling. So my wife said to me, what are we going to do? So I said, why don't you go and talk to her, make friends with her, and then offer her a generous amount, a big amount of money for her health club. And we can buy it because we want her members to come to our club and a little bit of her equipment. And so my wife did that, and she went and made friends and then said, look, if you're struggling, we'll buy your health club for you and we'll give you this much for it. And this lady said, well, she was a little bit indignant and said, no, it's okay. I'm doing fine. So we said, okay, we're here if you need us. Anyway, 6 months later, she comes to us. Now here she comes into our health club, and she grabs hold of our manager. She's in tears, she's crying, she's heavily pregnant. The landlord has locked her out, so he's foreclosed on the lease. He's locked the doors. The business is collapsing completely, and she's totally distressed. She's a real mess. And she says, please buy my health club. You can have it for this much. So the manager phones my wife, and my wife comes to me and says, now what are we going to do? So I said, okay, so think about this, guys. Here's the thing. Typically, the profit-driven capitalism model is going to say, wow, awesome, that now we can pick that business up for like $1, 10 cents in the dollar. We can pick it up for peanuts. So let's do it. So they would just give her that much, take the business and see you later. That isn't the model that's going to work, because you're going to push all of them over the limit. She's going to go with have a distressed childbirth. The kid's going to be delinquent. She's going to have no money. She's going to go straight onto the welfare system. If there is one, there is in this country. She'll be on welfare. The kid it'll know generational welfare, and that's bad. The landlord, okay, he's got a stake. In this case, it was a guy, or a bloke, a man. He's distressed. He's got to pay his mortgage, and suddenly the lease has collapsed. The creditors are all distressed. They've paid, they've delivered goods and services, but they haven't been paid yet. The members of that girl's club, they've all paid in advance, but they can't get in. And even if they could, the place has collapsed. So all these stakeholders are in distress. Our job as a significant, we are entrepreneurs. And if they all fall into distress and go on the welfare system, we pay for the welfare system, okay? We pay the big taxes. So it's illogical, it's unsustainable. So let's use our expertise, caring and sharing. Let's help them. But we don't just help them simply because if you did help them and you never got a return, that isn't sustainable either. We have to profit out of this thing. To make it sustainable, we all grow with the tide. So I said to my wife, why don't you go back to that lady and offer her the same amount, the big amount, the original offer, because we still want those members. Nothing's changed from that point of view. So don't rip her off, don't plunder her. Tell her we'll give her that amount. But you also tell her we've got to get into that club, so we're going to pay out the lease. Okay, we're going to get hold of the landlord and pay out the whole lease. It still had about 1.5 years to run. We paid it out. And then we said to them, your creditors, give us the list. We'll pay them out. It's only a small club, so then we're a big corporation. So we paid them out. And then we said, okay, now you tell your members, those ones that have all paid for their memberships, tell them they come and work in our club. And they can work for free, join our club for free for the duration of the balance of their membership. And that way we look after all the stakeholders, everybody that's in distress is catered for. But now, lady, whose health club it is, you've got to do some work, okay? Because if you really want to prosper, you get on the telephone and you phone everybody that ever walked through your door since you opened those doors 10 years ago. Phone them all. You tell them that we are the best people on the planet and they must all come to our club. And as they come, we will pay you for each member over and above everything else. We will pay you for everyone that comes and joins us. And every time it gets to 10, we'll pay you another margin on the next 10, and then more on the next 10, and more on the next 10. So we incentivized her to get to work, okay? This is the gleaning principle, the biblical gleaning principle in the modern marketplace. It works, all right? She got on the phone and she phoned up so many people. She wasn't a very good club manager, which is why it collapsed, but she was an awesome sales lady. And she got on the phone and she sold our club to her members. And they came and they came and they came. And so many came and joined up with us. We didn't know if they're coming from our marketing or from her sales. So we just paid her for all of them. Okay. And when they join our club, our staff are taught and trained to love them to death, which is why I don't think any training goes on. They just love them to death. I know they're going to join our club. They're going to join every year over and over. We will prosper forever from all of those new hundreds and hundreds of members that joined us. We happily paid that lady. She went away. She had an awesome childbirth. You know, every stakeholder was dealt with, thousands of people, thousands, because don't forget, we're a big club with a lot of members, a lot of staff, directors, the board of both clubs. Everybody watched the economic modeling, and I explained it to all of them as we went. I want them to learn. Okay, so the point being, we all prospered out of one transaction, which we could have plundered that lady, but that isn't the way it should be done. That does not work. It's not sustainable. To this day, so that was like 12 years ago, she's still one of our greatest advocates. Wow. She still sends people to us, and we still got all those old members signing up year after year, and we all prospered out of the deal.
Wow, 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 wow. So you're obviously going to get a lot of people currently that's watching it that doesn't understand the concept pretty much, because I think what education teaches, universities teach, and everybody, and what people learn is trying to take as much market share as you can, regardless what that looks like. You know, I think fundamentally the cliche words is dog eats dog, and, you know, just fighting for your space and getting to that part. Why do you feel why do you feel that model doesn't work? Because obviously we can see it doesn't work for, but some, it feels like it works for them because they're obviously profiting of the misfortune of others. But do you want to give us more insight to what that looks like? Because I think you've explained it in one of the other ones, and I'd love to see if you can explain it again to us.
Yeah, the model is unsustainable, Ron. The thing is, let's look at the fundamentals of wealth creation, and this is the biblical model as how it works. In order to create wealth, or shall I say, wealth can only be created through human enterprise. There's no other way to create wealth at all. Okay, so if Ronald Nair had all the gold on the Witwatersrand under his bed, okay, you would think, geez, oh, Ron's a good bloke, I want to be his friend. But only if we ascribe value to gold. If gold had no value, he would just have a big yellow lump under his bed, good paperweight, nothing else. Okay, but it's because we ascribe value to it that it is wealth. So that means we have to have humans to create wealth, and we have to have humans that have the ability to create wealth. That's the two big deals, all right? If every time we do a transaction, we plunder it under a profit-driven capitalism model or a greedy model, whatever model we've ever put forward, it doesn't matter. The results are always the same. If we always take everything off the table out of every deal we ever do, all for ourselves, and we leave no margin for anybody else, you ultimately they descend into poverty. So systemic poverty sets in, and ultimately then you end up with lots of poor people. Wealth becomes centralized to a few wealthy people, and wealth then becomes finite. Okay, so irrespective of the moral standards of that and so on, the connotations, it just physically becomes finite. There's no more, because you've plundered these people. They can't do anything else. That's what happened over and over again in the Bible. It's happened over and over again in history. Then wealth becomes finite. Ultimately, they will turn on you. Every 80 to 100 years, there's an economic collapse or a war or a revolution. You can go back 700 years of modern Western history and all history, and you'll find the same thing happening over and over again. So it's physically unsustainable. If, on the other hand, when we do a deal, we make sure that we leave margin on the table so that those people can trade again and again with each other and with us, just like Boaz did in the book of Ruth, just like I did at the Fernwood, the two health clubs, okay? If we do that, we start to create people of means, and they start to rise with the tide, and wealth then becomes infinite. That is a physical fact. So wealth is actually infinite. The power of the marketplace is infinite. So if we continue to do business with that mindset, it actually means that there's so much more wealth to go around. You end up with universal prosperity and human flourishing, and you eliminate the threat of an insurrection. And you know what? I've sat with the most corrupt leaders around the world. That one of the reasons I built such a big company, $1 billion corporation, it wasn't because I wanted a big company. It's a madhouse. I would rather be out the back here on my jet ski catching fish. But it's not, my assignment is to build this big company to have the influence and the affluence in the marketplace. So that means I can go into the door of very wealthy people, many multi-billionaires, government leaders. Last year, I was in the White House, okay, at the invitation of the Treasurer of the United States discussing stuff. Lebanese government, you know it, universities all over the world. So because they see that, okay, these people have built this big company using this modeling, and it's actually worked. Some of the most prominent unis, in fact, I would say the most prominent university in the world, has said, can we do a case study on what you guys have done? Wow. Okay, so even though it's counterintuitive, so when you think to yourself that the transaction with the 2 health clubs, it's counterintuitive to offer them so much for their health club. But if we go past that and test it, I tested those things back when I had that motorcycle business in Perth. I tested it over and over and over. I found it always worked. Wow, okay, now I can use that. And so with that, we've created this model, this Capitalholism that works so well. But the way to teach it, to answer your question there, Ronald, it's counterintuitive. So we teach it A, through our membership site and so on, but B, through stories, through showing hundreds of just stories. This is how we did that. That's how we did this. This is how we did that. And when people see it in story form, they suddenly say, gee, okay, this works. Let me try it. And I know that as soon as they try it, they never go back to the old way. It just doesn't work.
So I want to lead to another question that I think I have. So I've picked up on so I'm busy writing a book, which and it's called God's Code to Business. So funny enough, and this is how I think we started connecting, is that this is the first person I've seen or heard that actually was speaking exactly to the book that I was writing. And so as a result, I've been getting a lot of requests. And the big thing that's come out of a lot of it is that I've been getting a lot of mentorship requests from speakers that actually speak for a living. And I found it very strange because the book allowed an opportunity or platform for me to speak on God's biblical view on business. And here are people that impact society saying, listen, I think I need mentorship. So I know that you run something called Kingdom Investors, which is a phenomenal platform. What is Kingdom Investors and how do people become a member and what would that look like though?
Okay. Kingdom Investors, it's badly named. It sounds like an investment platform, but it isn't. My pastor named it a long time ago, and it's a bit Christianese for us, so we just call it KI. KI has a vision to create what we call in secular terms a just nation. Okay, so in other words, it's a just nation driven by a preferred economy, which is the capital holistic model. So with that, we're going to have to learn how to do it, and we're going to have to influence the main people in the marketplace in order to change this culture of greed and self-centeredness into one of caring and sharing. So if we do that, we will actually switch off the tap of all social distress, economic distress, and human suffering that you can think of. Okay, so if you think about that carefully, it's a big statement, but it's a fact. If you switch off the greed and self-centeredness, you suddenly turn off the tap that out of which flows all of this human misery, all of it, all right? So we've decided, okay, we have to teach people to do that, to switch off the tap, but at the same time, once we switch off the tap, we've got to mop up the water, fix all the social distress, employ social initiatives that we figure out and that work, and get on and fix the homelessness in women, fix the domestic violence, fix the starving over here, fix the corruption over there, all the things that we can fix, because we're big and ugly and influential enough to do it. But if we can teach all the business people to do the same, we will reach tipping points in the communities, in the cities, and in the nations to do this, okay? I'll come back to the tipping points in a second. But what happened in 2011, okay, is the Lord showed me the biblical version of this. It's called a sheep nation. So you've got sheep and goat nations in the Bible, Matthew 25. And the sheep nation is one that has eliminated social distress. And that is what the kingdom of God would look like on earth. You couldn't come into the earth and look at it now and say, this is the kingdom of God, because there's so much, suffering and misery. But if we fixed all of that through the modeling that I've just described, then you have what's called a sheep nation or a just nation. Okay, so we put that in practice in 2013 across all of the members of KI. So KI is a marketplace ministry. So it's like a church ministry or a business ministry without the Christianese. We don't want to be, rolling on the floor, giggling and being Pentecostal or whatever we want to be. This is a vision to create a better world, to do what operational Christianity should have done for the last 2,000 years and hasn't done, because we've never dealt with the root cause of the problem. We built lots of beautiful churches and stuff, and that's great. Got everybody saved, that's great, 2.5 billion of them, but it didn't make an impact on the misery in the world. So this does. So as we decided, okay, let's launch this, and we launched it in Australia first, because Australia is a very, very important nation on the international stage, and this is crucial. This is important for you guys. If you understand that we need a benchmark so the rest of the world can look in and say, how did you do that? How did you get rid of unemployment? How did you get rid of the unfunded liabilities of the government? In other words, the lies the government have told to get your vote, which can never be paid for by this generation, will have to be paid for by our children, and they're going to live in financial anarchy trying to pay for it. South Africa is just as bad, if not worse, than Australia. Europe is a basket case because of it. And how did you get rid of this? How did you create this just nation? Well, we can say, glad you asked. That the benchmark needs to be an important nation in the marketplace. It needs to be a country that, is in, like Australia, for example. It's the 12th economy in the world by GDP. It's one of only, in those days, one of only 8 AAA rated economies left on earth. Our banks are always amongst the biggest banks in the world. Our Commonwealth Bank is much greater. Its market capitalization is much greater than all the German banks combined, including Deutsche Bank. Okay, they're always in the top 20 safest banks in the world. We've got half the world's resources in this great big continent here. We're leaders in sport, all this stuff. And at that period of time, we were heading up the UN Security Council. Okay, so all sorts of reasons why Australia is so important, but it's only 25 million people. Very easy to reach a tipping point in the minds of 25 million people than it would be in, say, the United States or the EU, where you're dealing with 300 million people. So we set about doing it here. We set about thinking, how will we change the marketplace to reach a tipping point for change in the nation? And we looked at it carefully, and we said, okay, let's look at what is the driver in the marketplace. Who creates the culture in the marketplace? And we found that it's the small to medium enterprise, the SMEs. And it'll be the same in South Africa. I've never done the stats, but I know it'll be the same because it's the same over the whole planet. Yeah. So in Australia, 99.5%, so almost all business except 0.5% is SME, small to medium enterprise. Only 0.5% is large business. That means, and we employ the most people, we control virtually everything in the marketplace. We control the culture, we control the well-being of our cities, the socio-economic well-being of the cities, all comes out of the SMEs. So just down the road here, our third biggest city is Brisbane. It has 196,000 SMEs in Brisbane. Wow. It's 2.5 million people live there. We know that under the theory of tipping points, we only have to reach 6%. Normally, you have to reach 10% of a community in order to change their mindset and get them to change the culture. When it comes to business people, they're more committed. So it's only 6% that needs to be influenced. Well, we've got 196,000 there. 6% is 11,740. That's a very, very small number. If we can get them to come and do our course, and we then issue them with a number to say they've done our course, we can monitor those numbers, and we know that when we reach 6% or 11,700, we will reach a tipping point in the marketplace of Brisbane, and that then will tip the whole culture of the city, because they are the engine room of that whole city. SMEs are the engine room. And this is not theory. We've done this in communities, okay? And it works because they see, well, why wouldn't I join what these guys are doing? Because they make more money than the ones that don't do it. Those numbers that I said, those ASP numbers, all shall prosper numbers, they will go onto an international register, which is a worldwide register of ethical traders. And everybody that wants to do business and goes onto, one of the platforms to find people to do business with, they will find the ASP register. And on there, it doesn't matter if it's Olga in the Ukraine. If she wants a plumber, she can go onto the register and she'll find Boris, who's the plumber in the Ukraine. He's the guy that will look after her, give her an honest quote, do a great job. We can monitor the feedback from Olga all around the world, and we can make sure everybody is doing it the right thing. If anybody's a crook getting bad feedback, we can strike them off the list or retrain them. And that way we know, as we issue more and more ASPNs in all different communities around the world, and keep in mind, we put millions behind this to market the thing, so it becomes universally known, just like eBay or whatever. And in that process, we start to reach tipping points in these communities and in these cities until we end up with just nations or sheep nations as they are in the Bible. So that's a strategy that we have in place. Last year, I lectured to over 60 million people. There are over 350,000 students in Bible colleges around the world learning our stuff to get their bachelor's degree. It's massive now. It's like a wave. It's a movement for change in the marketplace.
So how do people get involved? I know that you have a monthly membership fee and there's a 7-day trial period. People can check it out. What does it look like? And is it all around the world? And how do people connect? How would they connect though?
Yeah. Okay. So KI, what we do, there are chapters rolling out all around the world. I think we've got another 100 to deploy this week if I can get to it, or next week if I can't get to it. But and some of them are in South Africa, some of them in Johannesburg, I think I've got 2 in Cape Town opening next week. But these chapters, what they do is they gather business people, secular or Christian, it doesn't matter, or competing faiths, Islamic guys, girls, they come to KI, they love it, and they learn a lot from it. We're all the same in the marketplace, right? But the point being that they invite people to come and watch the videos that we've recorded as lessons on the website. So only one person who's the leader is a paid up member, and all the rest come and watch for free, either at their place or at a church or at a conference center, wherever they're going to screen it, tea and coffee. And then there's workbooks after the screening, so they can workshop what they've just learned amongst themselves in a community format. So that goes on all the time, and there's new lessons every month and so on. But that starts to get people to think and prove that what we're talking about actually works. The ASPN course is under development. We've already tested it in our own community. We know it all works. We've tested it elsewhere in the world. But the ASPN, that should be about 6 weeks away. We're hoping, end of July, early August, we'll deploy that. All of those chapters then will encourage those people who attend to actually join KI and go on the ASPN course. It'll probably take them a month or so to get the course, and that then gives them an ASP number. So it's kingdominvestors.com.au, kingdominvestors.com.au. You can log on there and get a 7-day free membership. We're looking for leaders all over the world, guys. So if anybody wants to host a chapter, you don't have to be a billionaire. You don't even have to be in business. You can just be a host and gather people to come and learn. It's all over the world. Okay, it's actually the most strategic and rapidly becoming the biggest marketplace ministry in the world. And that's not me bragging. That's just me encouraging you to say that if you want to be part of a genuine movement with a strategy for change that has proved it, then KI is really growing around the world. kingdominvestors.com.au. At the moment, the membership fee is $20 a month. Everything else we've ever done since we started in 16 years ago in 2004, we paid for. Okay, so wherever I spoke around the world, I never charged. I paid my own flights. It costs over $3 million a year to run KI, and I paid every single year, never charged anybody anything. But with the membership site, we were attracting entrepreneurs to create a change, and if they didn't have $20, they weren't going to be making a change. They wouldn't have the capacity. But we've changed the model, and we're going to drop that down to $9.90, I think, so that virtually everybody on the planet can join. And then the ASPNs will be the entrepreneurs, the business owners that we want, and they'll pay $20, not $29. They'll pay $20, and everybody who joins KI, so the chapters and the chapter leaders, that'll just be $9 or $9.50 or whatever it's going to be. kingdominvestors.com.au.